We should be having 3 panelists. We're still waiting for one, but I'll start by introducing the 2 that are here. So let's start with Emily. Emily is, so she worked on ecosystem services and agricultural environments for her PhD under the supervision of Dr. Claire Cremens. After graduating from ESPM, Environmental Science Policy and Management from Berkeley in 2019, she made the switch to data science in New York City with the help of the Insight Fellowship. She is now a data scientist at a small startup called Arena.io that helps reduce bias and increase retention in hiring, especially in healthcare settings. She loves working in the private sector on impactful work with her small but dedicated and highly collaborative team. Her team leadership and technical skills from her PhD helped her with this transition, but it was her outreach, for example, with Basis and Dinner with a Scientist and nonprofit work. For example, she was the director of Unconscious Bias Project that set her apart in the private sector. So a lot of cool things to ask her about. And then next we have Huang, and he is actually a UC Riverside microbiology PhD alumni from the fall of 2019. He came from the McFrederick lab in entomology, which many of you know if you're from UC Riverside. And long before his time at UCR, he grew up in Oakland, California, and later attended UCLA for his degree in microbiology. Currently, he's a data scientist in the R&D team of a startup, Symbiome, based in San Francisco. His main line of work involves identifying and characterizing unique and novel microbiomes for development, for integration into skincare products. The work breaks out into 2 portions, a bioinformatics portion to assemble microbial genomes and analyzing microbial ecology data. And then there's the wet lab molecular biology portion, studying microbe, and microbe host cell interactions. So a lot of cool stuff at his work, but when he's not at work, you can find him practicing motorcycle techniques at a nearby parking lot, playing catch up on the hot series 6 months ago on Netflix, or joining a D&D session with friends. Okay. Oh, Nolan is here. So let me introduce Nolan as our last panelist. So Nolan received his BS and his PhD in botany and plant sciences from UC Riverside also, using image analysis and chemical genomics to understand endomembrane trafficking. He went on to do a postdoc at UCLA using single cell sequencing to understand the role of microRNA in B-cell lymphoma. At the Ellison Institute, Nolan is a senior computational biologist where he works with various research groups to facilitate biological insight through statistical analysis, data mining, and data visualization. He also helps run a microscopy working group and spearheads an international workshop aimed at teaching basic programming to bench biologists. Outside of his work, Nolan loves to spend time with his 2 kids, Olivia and Leonard, and swing dances with his wife, Samantha, and runs a monthly logic puzzling event called Puzzled Pint. So we got some really cool data science stuff to talk about and cool hobbies from all of our panelists. So I will now kind of just turn it over to you as the panelist to kind of tell us about your journey a little bit more, of how you got to the position you're in now, and kind of following up with like, what is it like to work like a day in the life of your job? So I will start with Emily.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And if you see the pup and my husband in the background, she's getting very excited about dinner time coming up. So she's going to be a little bit more active for this. So sorry about the dog barks, potential dog noise in the background there. So as Jessica said, I did my PhD at UC Berkeley, and I would say that when I came into my PhD, I was 95% sure that I was going to become a professor. And then it was about like 3 to 4 years in that I was like, maybe that wouldn't be quite the right fit for me. I like a little bit more structure and a little bit more like work-life boundaries than a lot of the professors I had seen had. And so that's when I started to explore other opportunities. And I was actually considering a wide range of professions outside of academia. So I interviewed for a position at the Union of Concerned Scientists. I was applying to fellowships like AAAS and CCST, which is the California version of AAAS, as well as looking at nonprofits such as the Xerces Society. And really focusing in on kind of the skills that I had built from outreach, as well as kind of that background knowledge that I had in environmental science, especially in ecology and entomology. And it was during that exploration that I learned about data science and specifically the Insight Fellowship, and kind of applied on a whim, saying like, well, I want to go back to the East Coast. They have a program there. It would be a great way to transition to a job. And if I don't like it, then it doesn't really matter. I got in and decided to do the fellowship. And that's where I learned that actually data science, I'm really, really happy that I got to transition into data science. And so a little bit about the data science that I do that I think might be different from the other two panelists is I switched incredibly far away from the type of work that I was doing in my PhD. So I was doing experimental design, causal inference, and field collection of data. And all of that, of course, in this kind of environmental science realm. And since then, I haven't worked with like a single piece of environmental data. So I'm using those same skills, experimental design, causal inference, and like understanding data, but just in very different contexts. So the current job that I have is with Arena.io. It is a small startup based in Baltimore, but they also have a New York office, which is where I am. And they started out of this idea that what's wrong with our labor market is not like high unemployment or low wages, but rather that those problems are symptoms of the larger fact that people are not finding the right jobs for themselves. And this is caused by a lot of inefficiencies in how we advertise for positions, as well as how we evaluate people for positions. So in order to get people into the right positions where they will be happy and progress and thrive, we want to predict retention rather than predict like, do they have the right skills for this position? And in many cases, a lot of the jobs out there, on the job training is huge. So we take questionnaire answers and use those to predict retention in different jobs across healthcare industries. And then we also have a focus on bias mitigation. And so we actually debias all of those questionnaire answers before they go into our final retention model. One of the other differences, I think, and sorry, I'm probably taking up too much time, but one of the other differences between like this work and I think the work that you'll hear about from the other two panelists is that data science is our product. So there's a sense that the prediction that we can give to clients saying like this person will stay more than a year at your company, or this person is likely to leave before a year comes at your company, that is the product that we sell to our clients versus the data science being a something that benefits other choices that our company is making. And day in the life, I'm actually a data scientist / project manager. So I kind of have this split level where 50% of my time is based and working in the models and understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it, and building new types of models. And then the other 50% of my time is working with our product teams, our client success teams, our engineering teams, to make sure that data science as a whole is delivering on all of its projects that it needs to, and being able to scope out what exactly needs to happen in the next week, the next month, the next 3 months, in order to make sure that we're kind of reaching those, helping all of the other teams to reach those goals as a company. And I'll stop there because my dog has decided to play a symphony in the background.
Zoom life. No, thank you so much. Can we hear next from Mike? Oh, you're muted.
Great. First off, that was awesome. I guess my story is still like ongoing. Well, everyone's story is still ongoing, but I think like the aftermath with everything going on with COVID, I guess starting off with my grad school career, I wanted to lean towards more teaching, but and staying in academia. But then again, like Emily mentioned, we have different pushes and pulls and pushes with our work-life balances and what we want from what we want to do with our work and how much of it is going to be in our lives. But I took it, I guess for me, it was more for more selfish reasons. I grew up in the Bay Area, and that's a really great, and there's a lot of great opportunities to do a lot of different and cool science here. And I took that advantage. And as soon as I defended, I started applying to a lot of different companies, applying different portions of my work, from next generation sequencing to just a lot of molecular biology. I almost worked for, ultimately landed to kind of a opportunity of a lifetime where I get to continue on with my like bacteriology microbiome work from the McFedrick lab, where there were periods of time where I almost worked and pivoted to, say, antibody development, where that development in R&D is very next generation sequencing work heavy. So there are a lot of points where I could have pivoted and leaned into different portions of my technical skills from grad school. But that's a little bit about how I got here. I'm still doing I want to call it a post-mortem since I'm still alive, but and there's a pandemic going on. So I was just thinking about like what did happen the last 12 months, since I've only been working at Symbiome since 14 months ago, which is just right before COVID started. But I guess going on to a day-to-day routine, it really varies for me. I work in a very young startup where we're still trying to find our way with R&D. Our goals consistently change, where I guess a great example is what I'm doing right now, where the last 6 months I've been mainly working in the lab, where we've been working on this biomanufacturing project where we are incorporating our very first microbial-based ingredient to our cosmetics. But before that, we were looking into other potential candidates where I was spearheading the data mining process, where we were looking into binning genomes assembled from metagenomic data, or shotgun metagenomic data to be exact. But at this point, where our R&D team is at the whims of what our shareholders and investors want as a young startup. I think that's why there's so many changes, and why there's going to be like a very heavy microbiology aspect to my work for 8 months. And then now probably for the next month, it'll be very bioinformatic heavy, where we're going back to data mining. We're going back to, we're trying to publish a really big impact paper with one of our collaborators, because our investors are interested in publishing, which is a really interesting and rare opportunity that gets investors excited. So yeah, that's really how my day-to-day goes in terms of like the last 12 months.
Cool, that's super interesting. And then last, can we hear from Nolan?
Yeah. Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay. Awesome. I was having like technical difficulties. Sorry, I was late. So yeah, my name is Nolan Ung. I did my PhD in botany and plant science at UC Riverside, and while I was there, I was able to be a part of this IGERT grant. And what that is it's I forget what the acronym stands for. It's like interdisciplinary research, and it was the grant was with the electrical engineering department. And so we were able to, they paired up electrical engineers and bench biologists and had them kind of work together to solve problems. And from that, I gained expertise and experience in coding, image analysis. I think started with MATLAB was my first language. And so I gained those both like computational and wet lab skills in my PhD. And from there, I went on to a postdoc at UCLA. And, you know, I think what Huang and Emily were saying about, you know, work-life balance, I thought, okay, I'm going to do, you know, plant research. And then I found out that all of the plant research is like in the Midwest, and I was not ready to move in the Midwest. So that's something to definitely think about that I didn't think about is where are your careers and, you know, the jobs, feasibly, the jobs that you want to do, where are they? And are you willing to go there? Because I did not think about that. So I knew I wanted to get into a different field, one that was more kind of prevalent in the area. And so I went out and looked for, you know, human biology, cancer jobs or postdocs really, because I knew I had to gain some experience in that field and in that system. So I figured a postdoc would be a way to do that. So I went to lab at UCLA, gained those skills. They wanted a computation or a quantitative biologist to do some cell tracking, image analysis, but also to do some molecular biology. And so I was like, oh, perfect. I can utilize both of those skills. And while I was there, or when I was kind of wrapping up my time there, I found this job at the Ellison Institute. And the Ellison Institute is a really unique place. It's a cancer research institute, and we have both labs. We have about 5 labs. I kind of like think it as like a super lab, right? We have like 5 PIs, but we all work together. We all collaborate. We work on very similar problems and systems. And we also have a clinic like at the top floor of the labs. So we have practicing oncologists, MD, PhDs that treat patients in the building, and the patients can see the research that's going on. We also have access to the a patient cohort there, so we can do research with medical records. We can collect patient samples, and we also collaborate with USC. So it's a really interesting, you know, interdisciplinary place, and I really felt at home there because I am very interdisciplinary. I have a background in plant biology. I went to cancer. I do computational biology and wet lab biology. And so my role there, so I guess I can get into more of the day to day. I basically, like all of the kind of analysis stuff that you kind of had to learn to do in graduate school and do yourself. Me and my group, we do that kind of for everyone. So we're partly service group, but we're also partly research group. So we have our own kind of interested small research projects that we pursue on our own, usually with another someone else's data set. I don't go into the lab and do the bench work, but I have done it. So you know, I have that experience, I have that understanding of how experiments work, how to best analyze them computationally. And so day to day, I have about 3 different projects probably that I help the wet lab biologists, you know, store the data, you know, and process the data, analyze the data, help them visualize data for conferences, papers, those kinds of things. We do experimental design, all of the statistics, image analysis with the microscopy data, what else? RNA and DNA-seq. So we're kind of a multifunctional group that helps them with anything that's kind of outside of their comfort zone. And I also teach a little bit the biologists to help them, you know, gain these skills for themselves so that they're not 100% reliant on us. And it's an internal workshop, not an international workshop. I didn't want to, I'm not that good. It was an internal workshop for for our members, for our biologists. And yeah, I mean, I guess beyond meetings and, constantly communication is a huge part of what I do. Communicating, what the biologists want, what their hypotheses are, what are the parameters of their assays, and then doing the data and then communicating what the data means and helping them understand. So a lot of communication, a lot of analysis, and I'm going to be managing 3 people. So it's a little bit of analysis, a little bit of people managing, a little bit of communication.
Cool. Yeah, it's really nice to see that there's some people that took really big pivots and some less big pivots. So yeah, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. We actually got one mailed in pre-panel, so I'll ask that one right now. But while I'm asking this, think about your questions and drop them in the chat and specify if you have a question for any specific person or for all. So the question that got mailed in is, how can you gain skills if you're already late in the PhD and don't feel totally confident on the data analysis front, at least not enough for a career?
So this is something that I probably should have mentioned in between doing the Insight Fellowship and becoming a data scientist at Arena. I actually was a program director for the Insight startup company. So I helped, I think, like over 150 PhDs transition into data science careers during my 1.5 years there. So I have a little bit of experience in this as well. But the thing that I saw of people who were coming out of their PhD really interested in the data analysis that they had done, but didn't have necessarily a deep background in it, was to basically do a case study project. So this would be, especially if you're thinking about transitioning like a pivot like I did, where it's fully out of the research that you were doing previously, you'd probably want to use data that is publicly available, that is not related to your PhD data, and then ask an original question. So you can get an idea of what kind of the scope of these projects look like by going to Kaggle, which does competitions actually, but I wouldn't actually suggest doing a Kaggle like data set problem. I would suggest coming up with your own. But the main thing to think about is, 1, work with dirty data. 2, merge and clean it yourself. 3, make sure that you are designing the modeling part of this. And 4, think about your user. So when you're thinking about your user, the idea is like, is what I'm providing actually actionable? So in the case of like Arena and the product that we produce, we say this applicant is likely to stay at your company or they're unlikely to stay at your company. And that's part of the decision that a hiring or that's part of the information that hiring manager uses to make a decision on whether they're going to hire that person or not. And so you really want it to be that clear of like, who is your user and what are they going to be doing with the recommendation or the prediction that you're giving them. And if you just do one of those, it usually sets you up pretty well for a lot of the interviews that you'll face, at least at more classical tech or data science focused companies. And usually those types of projects take somewhere between like 1 and 3 months to complete, depending on how much time you actually devote to it every day. Oh, the other recommendation is, if you don't know Python, do the project in Python, just because it is so industry standard. If you want to shift into a tech focused or like a tech company, Python is probably going to be what you use. R is also okay, but I would say like 10% of the companies I've worked with use R, 90% of them use Python, and all of them are totally fine with Python if you come in with it, and only 20% are okay with R coming into it.
I don't have as I think extensive knowledge or experience as Emily, but I think it depends on where you are in that, in your kind of learning journey. But I'm a new-ish, but I'm an instructor for the data carpentry and software carpentry organization, and that's more for academic biology or academic biologists. So if you kind of quickly Google software carpentry or the carpentries or data carpentry, it's a organization that teaches essentially like bench and field biologists coding skills for reproducible research. And they're very beginning. So it depends on how much experience you have. If you have no experience with coding, this is a good place. It's a really good place to start. They have like, occasional it's like 2-day workshops, like 8 hours. They're, pretty intense. They also have all of the material up on GitHub and on their website. So if you are self-motivated and you want to do it, you can go through the material, that material yourself. But I definitely recommend like trying to, and especially now everything's virtual. So I definitely recommend trying to get into one of those workshops if you are, inexperienced. And they have both R and Python. I came out of academia, and we're still kind of academic environment. So I definitely use R because of the biological, I think, twist to R and a lot of the tools that are there. But I totally agree with Emily. I think Python is really, if you're, it's really coming up and kind of overtaking. But I think both depends on the environment, but I think, yeah, to be safe, both, but Python, it seems to be gaining popularity. So I think that's a great piece of advice.
I guess for me, with my applications, in terms of how I've learned a lot of these tools that I currently use, it's, I guess for me, it was harder to get started on learning how to use a lot of the software that I use today, unless there's like an application or a tutorial. There's a lot of resources available for different software tools out there on many GitHubs for like microbiome data. There's a lot of different cookbooks or tutorials basically that show you how to a step-by-step guide, and they give you the data as well just to show you how to get comfortable with their command line interfaces and their essentially what to type in and how each different argument or different flags that you use in your code. I don't want to get too jargony in the conversation, but there's that in terms of specific software. But if you're interested in different pipelines that papers use, they will most likely list those software packages that they use in their manuscripts. Reviewers are also trying to push for more logs of the user scripts and user commands that that the authors used to produce the figures and produce the data set. So that's another area to look into as well, especially if you're have a lot of self-initiative to figure out a lot of these tools on your own.
Awesome. Super actionable advice. I love it. So we actually do have some more questions now from YouTube. So people on YouTube are watching too. And yeah, so this is a question from Thomas, and they ask, what advantage would a PhD give compared to a master's degree for a career in data science? Is it true that masters hit a glass ceiling at some point?
I can take this one. We had a lot of master students interested in Insight. So I would say that once you get into a data science career, a master's degree isn't going to, as long as you actually enter as a data scientist and not as a data analyst, those are two different career paths, just FYI. But as long as you enter as a data scientist, there isn't a glass ceiling. Like they won't say, oh, because you only have a master's degree, we can't have you work on this top level of our model. But the barrier actually comes in entering. So with people with PhDs tend to have thought to have more experience and more critical thinking skills, more independent experience on performing analyses or designing experiments. And all of those are highly valued in the data science career sector. However, that doesn't mean that if you have a master's degree that you can't get a data science job. It just means that you're going to have to demonstrate that you do have those, not just, you haven't just learned Python as a language, but you've actually applied it and can use it effectively. And one of the major things is being able to demonstrate that you can problem solve when you don't know something. So if you don't know something, how are you going to learn it? Because basically every single thing that I've done in my data science career has been completely new to me. And it's the skills that I learned during my PhD, where it was like, oh, I need to figure out which statistical package in R is going to be the right one for this and read the papers on that. Like those types of skills are the skills that I'm using on a daily basis. So again, no glass ceiling once you get into the career, but potentially a little bit more work to prove that experience with like independent projects that is outside of classwork.
Cool. And yeah, any other thoughts from Kwai and Nolan on that?
Yeah, I think it, I can only kind of speak from my experience at the Institute, but I think the PhDs are the ones in the more, the higher roles, the more managerial roles, which seems kind of weird. I don't think having a PhD means you're a good manager, but I think that there probably is some restriction as far as kind of how high you can go, I guess. But as far as like being the director of the bioinformatics division, like I don't know if you could do that without a PhD at an institute like this. But I think that as far as being in the group, doing the actual analytical data science work, it doesn't seem that from what I have seen, I don't think there's a limit on that. But I think if you want to start managing people, running divisions, running groups, then it might limit that. But that's kind of from just my small experience.
And I think that there is a true difference here. So Nolan still working in a more academic environment. I've seen vice presidents of companies who run their own sections and are overseeing 60 people who have bachelor degrees in data, and they're not even bachelor degrees in data science, they're bachelor degrees in something else completely, not even computer science. And they learn data science through the career. So I do think that this is a difference between like the private sector versus the academic sector. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So I guess I'll ask the next question then. If you don't have anything to add, Huang, do you have anything to add or in your? Okay, cool. I want to give you the chance. So the next question is kind of a good one from Jorge, and it's about, is there a difference, is there a difficulty of competition against people who have formal education in computer science, or is your skill set in biology, entomology, ecology, I guess I'll add botany, microbiology, is that an underrated strength? So how does that like kind of unique background play into your job now as far as like competitiveness and how you use it?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I guess for a lot of these, like in the private sector, especially in startups, they're looking for people who can wear a lot of hats. So for me, there wasn't a lot of competition between compared to like pure data scientists, since they were looking. The funny part is that originally this was a lab-based position until COVID happened, where I had to find a way to like reinvent my role essentially. And that's one of the benefits, side note, that's one of the benefits of working in a startup where there's not too much structure, where you're able to essentially work and figure out new ways to get deliverables out of your existing data. But yeah, I think coming from overall, in terms of the question, coming from a biological or experimental background, at least when you're like looking at data like DNA sequences, data scientists may just see A's, T's, and G's as just or a sequence of A, T, and G, just a sequence of interest, but that a lot of their bosses or projects look for. But as biologists, we know that that means a lot more in terms of like what that means as a, like the following sequence would encode protein. There's a lot more meaning that we can pull out of what data we're looking for and what data we're mining from.
Yeah, I just finished hiring 3 people and to join my team. And they haven't even started yet. It's like, that's how recent it is. But I looked for, all of them have biology background. So when I was looking for, I guess, people, and specifically in this role, I think it's almost essential to have a biology background, and that's because you can look at the data in a pure computer scientist or I guess pure data scientist maybe would look at the data and will be able to analyze it in a really, I think, probably very effective way. But as biologists, we have the training of asking the right questions, I think, which is huge. Knowing, what questions to ask, what kind of anticipating what, biologists would want. So again, I'm kind of speaking from like a very kind of niche like experience, but when you're wanting to deliver something to biologists, if you're a statistical programmer in a pharmacy, a big pharmaceutical company, you're going to be answering to biologists. You can be talking to also like probably business people, but I think having that background is really can set you apart, because you understand that domain knowledge as well as having the analytical skills. And I think that is almost invaluable when talking and communicating with biologists. So if you're interfacing with, if you're interfacing with biologists in any way, that's going to be super, super helpful. I think that's going to probably set you apart from someone who can do the modeling and do the programming, but doesn't have the full understanding of why you would do something a certain way, or the understanding or the background of the biology. And that's kind of why I chose this job, or I really just loved this job, was because I was able to do both and use both of my background.
So to follow up on those perspectives, thinking about tech sector, private sector, you actually generally don't get a lot of competition from computer science, but you do get a lot of competition from other PhDs or other statistically heavy fields. So computer scientists tend to go into things like software engineering, maybe data engineering, maybe machine learning engineering. But as far as like data science, bread and butter, you will get a lot of competition outside of biology, entomology, ecology. The thing that I saw, though, is that when you are thinking about complex interactions and complex systems, that being able to ask the right questions actually transfers really well. So what Nolan is talking about, of having that context in biology and being able to think about it in the right way, if you know how to get familiar with a complex system, you can apply that same thing to get familiar with a new complex system, right? So I had to get familiar with healthcare hiring, and I can get familiar with that in the right way and understand it pretty deeply, pretty quickly, in ways that I think when you are working with astrophysics data, or looking at CERN there's a lot of competition from physicists in the tech industry. So I sometimes I'm a little mean to them, but when you're looking at like lots of random data points from your CERN collider, you may not actually be able to kind of understand those complex interactions in the same way, especially when they don't apply, they are not supposed to have rules tied to them. So I do think that it is an undervalued skill set, but you would have to make it clear in the interview process that this is a skill set that you bring and actually demonstrate it in the fact that like if you're interviewing with a company, you should be showing them that you've already done that research and you already understand their system. So when I was interviewing at Arena, I did that deep dive on healthcare hiring and their company before I got into the interview because I wanted to show them, hey, in a week that I had to prep for this, I already understand your system really well. And I already like can basically predict what problems you're going to have with your modeling. And so you have to demonstrate that knowledge kind of before they even ask for it to be demonstrated.
Yeah, I just want to echo like what you said, Emily, about those skills that you learn as a PhD that you sometimes don't even know that you have that you can apply to these to these jobs. Understanding, like learning quickly and understanding a complex system, doing the research, going out and figuring out how to do something, like, oh, I had to do use2 hybrid. I didn't know how to do that I just had to figure it out and ask someone, in graduate school. And then like, that's the same thing. You got to find the right people to talk to, you got to find the resources, and you have to figure out how to do it. Those kinds of things, communicating to audiences that aren't necessarily experts, like that's another huge skill. So, I think it's a theme that we've kind of have been dancing around, but I think, you do have a lot of these skills as a PhD that are applicable. And if you emphasize those, like Emily was saying, in the right context, I think that can be really advantageous.
That's super cool. Very encouraging. So yeah, this is a question that I'm kind of interested also in hearing is what does a typical data science job interview look like? And I guess particularly focusing on how it differs from maybe a traditional academic job interview.
Oh, it's so different. So in the private sector, data science job interviews tend to be a multi-step process. So usually this starts out with a call from a recruiter or an HR person. And this is literally just to like verify that you are the person that you say you are, and maybe ask like specific kind of yes or no questions about your experience, right? So if they want someone who has a lot of years of experience in Python or with a certain type of modeling, that person may ask those questions. They don't necessarily have the background to fully evaluate if you actually do have those skills or not. In many cases, unless you show some really like large red flags of not being cooperative, interrupting your interviewer, mentioning inappropriate things, like if you do any of those, you probably won't get passed to the next round. But if you don't, then you'll get passed to the next round. And that's when you either have like a technical assessment or you might talk to the hiring manager. So these conversations with hiring managers tend to be somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour. And they tend to cover your past experience, and you tend to talk a little bit more in depth about what you've actually been working on. So you might talk about a chapter that you wrote for your dissertation and what analysis methods that you use for that and why you chose those methods over something else. What problems did you have with your data that you had to overcome? Stuff like that. For the technical assessment, obviously, like that is a technical assessment, but a lot of companies are now doing data challenges. So they give you a set of data and a problem statement. It can be really vague. It can be really detailed. It depends on the company and what they're looking for. And they give you somewhere between like 48 hours and a week to work on it. And usually they'll give you an assessment of like, we think that candidates should spend 4 hours on this. We think you should spend however many. I would say never do less than the recommended amount of time. Try not to do more than twice the amount of recommended time. And in this case, usually the end product is like a piece of code, so either a Jupyter notebook or a script that you've written, and then potentially a presentation with some graphs or visualizations that you put together. If you pass both of those stages, then usually you're invited to an on-site, which is somewhere between like 3 and 5 interviews with the rest of the team. In many cases, you'll have a paired coding interview with someone where you'll actually be asked to code Python or R in front of somebody, and they'll say, hey, can you design a function that tells me if something is a palindrome or not? And you'll be like, what? If you want examples of those problems, you can look at HackerRank or LeetCode, as they have all of them. And I find them completely uninteresting and unimportant for my job, but something that many interview processes include, and so something that you do have to practice. Other interviews will be more likely more focused on problem solving skills and more like deeper dives into your experience and what you worked on before. And then potentially also if you are looking at a cross-functional role, so like the role I'm in, I have to work with client success, product, and engineering basically every single day. I had interviews with somebody from each of those teams as well in my interview process in order to make sure that I could work well with other people outside of my team. And so all of that tends to take somewhere between, like, the fastest process I've seen is probably like a week and a half to 2 weeks. Slowest process is like 6 months. And that was just because like the scheduling never worked out, or they had a pause, or the hiring manager went on maternity leave, stuff like that. And then after that, usually you have a call to give you an offer if they do want you. And that is kind of the like normal process. Obviously there's a lot of variation, but that kind of packages what you'll usually see in the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, from the academic side, it's really similar. It's really the same. Like, I don't think that. So I gave like a toy data set and had them. I didn't give a time limit. Maybe that was mean. I just said take all the time you want. And
that is very mean, actually.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was until you mentioned it right now. Yeah, so that I think, you know, and other than like the live coding exam, I haven't seen that or done that from like the kind of institute side, but I mean that seems pretty par for the course from my experience.
Sorry, I just laughed at another question that just popped up. But on this question, I guess since my interview was more of a bench scientist role, I can't speak much on the data science. I did, everything that you put on your resume is free game for your interviewers to ask. So be prepared to talk about it. I spent extra times talking about my bioinformatic experience during my dissertation as well, or during my dissertation. But I didn't have to deal with, since my role was initially planned for focus on bench work, I didn't need to deal with any technical challenges that are in a data science job interview. But I guess one thing I wanted to add in terms of the interview processes is it's not just a one-way exchange where you're giving the company that you're interviewing for information about, and you're proving yourself. You also want to show your interest for the company and know how much of a fit it is for you. That isn't towards contributing towards the original question, but I just wanted to interject that.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I wanted to circle back to it if someone didn't. Like, it is incredibly important to see this as you evaluating the company as well. I actually, like, when I was interviewing for positions, had like a loss in my family. And the way that companies responded to that and the need for like extra time in the interview process was incredibly telling to me about how well I would fit there, right? I wanted a company that was going to say, take the time you need, focus on yourself, like your family is the most important thing right now. And there were companies that did that and were just amazing. Like these people were incredibly sweet and supportive, and like they didn't even know me, and I still felt like, oh my God, they're wonderful. And there were other companies that were like, oh, I don't know, like that's going to mess with our timeline. And so this is, I think that's a pretty extreme example, but definitely like see it as a way to, as a place to evaluate them. And the companies are actually going to be really excited about you asking questions and seeing if it's going to be a good fit for you, because it shows them how much interest you actually have and how passionate you might be about the thing that you're going to be doing and the work that you'll be doing for them.
Yeah, that's super good advice. I also want to add on one other question before we move on to the others related to this. You're all working in sort of interdisciplinary ways, like whether it's just doing a bunch of different things like the wet lab and bioinformatics wing, or like working with actual other departments. Like, how did you demonstrate in the interview that you'd be good at being interdisciplinary? Like,
So this is the way that I do it. I think that a lot of people have different ways to do it, but I show a deep interest or like curiosity and a deep care for the people who work outside of my field. So when I was doing interviews with the client success team or the product team or the engineering team, while I obviously wanted to give them as much information they needed about me, one of the things that I was really interested in is understanding like, where are they coming from? What problems do they have? What are the issues that they have interfacing with data science? Because those are the things that hopefully I'll be helping to solve. And so I think that that kind of curiosity and care focused on people outside of data science was a really good signal that, you know, like I was going to be a good fit in this project management role that I'm in now.
Yeah, I'm also trying to pull things together, but in my role early on, I did work with, in terms of exchanging some of the science communication side with our marketing team when I started. And for that, I think as people coming from graduate school, we've all did TA ships. That's like a wonderful opportunity to build your communication skills, especially on top of all the talks that you're involved in, from conferences to different symposiums for your department. One thing I did to highlight my other interdisciplinary thing was just my relationship, I guess the workings of your lab, because not everyone's going to come from the same background and everyone has different strengths. In the manufacturing lab, when I was a graduate student, I didn't know a single thing about entomology. So we have a lot of conversations in that, but also in our support from the bioinformatics and genomics core at UC Riverside, highlighting those types of relationships, since you're not going to be able to do you're not going to be able to do everything in your PhD yourself, and there's going to be different areas of help, and highlighting your ability to communicate with them and interface with them to meet everyone's goals, including yourself, is highly valuable in these demonstrations.
I don't have anything to add. I think that's great.
all right, cool. Yeah, that was really great answers from both of you. Thank you. So I guess the next question, which I'll combine Sam's and Magda's, is how did you find the job you're in now? And how many job apps did you submit? How many of them were turned into an interview and finally into an offer? So just kind of walk you through that whole process a little bit.
I guess I can talk. So I don't know how representative my experience is, but everyone talks about networking and going and meeting people and talking to the actual people, and I did that. I networked. I joined kind of different organizations. I did the networking dinners and stuff. I talked to collaborators of my PI, and I ended up getting both my postdoc and my job just from like submitting things on Indeed and nature.com. So it depends, I think, on just the timing and everything, but that's how I ended up finding my job. I actually applied for a biostatistician position at the same institute, and my director said, no, you're not a fit for that position, but I think you'd be a good fit for this position, because he's hiring a second one, and so a different position. And so I was like, yeah, I'm open to that. And it turned out to be the perfect fit. So luckily, I think not everyone would do that, but I think luckily I was just kind of being open to different positions, and turns out I think it's probably the best decision I made. As far as number of applications, I can't even remember. I had only one other interview for a position before this one, and this job I wanted. By the end of the second interview, I knew I really wanted this job, and I put kind of all of my focus into this. And so I think I had one other interview, but I probably did somewhere between 10 and 20 applications. And I started a long time before I figured my postdoc was going to be done. So I was kind of just random looking for jobs, just kind of here and there. It wasn't like a big crunch time. So that's kind of just how I did it. And so it ended up not being too much. But I don't know how representative my experience is there.
So I think I have kind of the opposite side of the non-representative experiences. So going from I don't think I can talk that much about the transition from like PhD to Insight, because I was hired out of the program. But it was in concert with other interview processes that I was doing, but I just don't think that's representative of the industry as a whole. But my most recent transition from Insight to Arena, I think, is slightly more representative. And so I think I submitted 6 different applications, got into the interview process for every single one of them, because every single one of those positions was from a network connection. So I basically knew that I was guaranteed to get in front of the hiring manager for a first interview at least. And then like from there, I actually Arena was the only one that I wanted to continue to pursue after the interviews. And so that's the networking side of things. I had built up a huge network of companies and colleagues from working at Insight. And so being able to figure out what are the positions that I actually want to pursue, and then just going after those was pretty easy for me. But I would say that for networking, it's a long-term investment. So start early. If you are in your 4th year of your PhD and you don't plan to graduate for another 2 years, it is not too early to start networking in data science, because you can have a similar experience to what Nolan had, which is saying hey, I'm really interested, and then the right position doesn't come up for a while. And so building those relationships and then keeping them current can be really important. And also I found conferences or dinners or other larger events where a lot of people are meeting a lot of other people to be less effective than reaching out through LinkedIn and having one-on-one conversations. So always send a message when you're reaching out to someone on LinkedIn about why you're interested. And in that message, specifically ask if they can meet with you for a 30-minute chat. A lot of people will be really open to it because they love talking about themselves. Humans do. And so they will most likely say yes. And if that conversation goes well, then that's a connection that you should continue forward with. If that conversation just feels awkward, totally fine. Forget about it and try someone new. There's a lot of data scientists in the world. Like, you do not have to get along with every single person that you find, like, that whose work you find interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm on like the really far end of the spectrum. I want to say I submitted maybe 60 resumes. This was also during the process where I was still like building it and practicing my interview skills. So maybe I want to say I spoke to a human from maybe 12 of those. um, and I think some of them were starting to be remote, or were startups that wanted to um, make sure that their candidates were a right fit. So there were some interviews that dragged on. I had maybe 5 phone interviews for one job position towards the end of my search. But I think I ultimately took the first offer that I got. That's usually not recommended, but there was a few cycles of negotiation. But for me, I started. So this is coming around in terms of like the networking experience. But I think maybe towards the end of my job search, my networking was starting to come and like bear its fruits because I started so late. I started around the time, um, yeah, just around the time that I was preparing to defend, which is maybe like there was like a 3 to 6 month gap between that. And most of my network was also in a wrong region where I wanted to work. A lot of folks, I was very interested in also like technical support for the different biotech companies as well, which were mostly in San Diego, LA area. So a lot of those positions weren't available at the time when I was looking in a different region where a lot of those network contacts weren't, didn't have connections into those positions.
Cool. Yeah. So since we're talking about networking, I guess I will ask like Sam. So I'll get a little bit out of order, but Sam asks, how do you network outside of academia? So
So I do this by starting to find companies that I'm interested in. So I knew that I wanted to work in a startup. I really like the fast pace, like, jack of all trades environment. And so I would look at Crunchbase or there's a series of websites called like Built in NYC, Built in Chicago. So kind of go from there and find startups that I found interesting, and then go to LinkedIn, look at the people who work there, and find someone in data science who I think I could have a connection to. So whether that's like they went to the same undergrad institution as me, like I have a shared connection with them of like a good friend that I know, and reach out that way. And in many cases, like I didn't have a connection with them. And so I would just reach out kind of cold and say, hey, like, having done my research on this person, like give an idea of why I'm interested in talking to them, and then ask for a little bit of their time. One of the things that I will discourage people from doing is asking like specific questions in that first message. Actually, a lot of people do that to me because I have YouTube videos from Insight, and they're like, how do I get into the Insight Fellowship? And I'm like, I can't talk about that anymore. I don't work there anymore. And I will but I will talk to you about transitioning into data science. It's not that I don't want to talk to people about that. It's just that I can't give you that specific answer. And so instead of asking specific questions, kind of give a general idea of what you're interested in talking about and ask for the time. And that way the conversation can kind of flow naturally when you get into it, rather than the person being like, oh, I'm not the expert, or I can't actually talk to that, and have it kind of in their mind shut down before it even gets started. But yeah, because of the companies that I'm interested in, I tend to take that side rather than trying to go from like a more people-centric view.
Yeah, just a quick chime in from me. There, from my friends who have worked in very software engineer heavy fields, and my experience as well, cold emails, I guess in the long term work, I think you will have to speak to a lot of different people. And I think for me, starting off like that wasn't something that I was like incredibly comfortable with, but um, there will be people who are willing to like open up and share, talk about themselves again. Like everyone loves doing that. But for me, I also, this was like pre-pandemic, of course, but there were other events in my area for people interested in different things, as well as different, like in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's different startup showcases where new and burgeoning startups are presenting their products or presenting their concepts. That also attracts other players from the biotech field, whether it's people like myself from other startups, or um, people people who are interested in biotech overall from their own companies. So there's a mix of like um, LinkedIn code messaging as well as different events you can go to as well.
Cool. And then, yeah, I figured you already talked a little bit about your networking. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to Hannah's question now. Thank you for answers on that one. So Hannah is asking, how much of your job is self-directed and how much is managed from a higher up, from somewhere else in the company? Like how much independence kind of do data science jobs offer?
Cool. I think so. For my experience, being in more of like an academic type environment, nonprofit environment, our questions are still very like, very similar to, I think, what you would have in like an academic lab. Not necessarily basic biology, definitely more translational and applied, but you have these kinds of big overarching questions, and you don't have like a stakeholder necessarily. Like we're not delivering a product, right? We're doing research. So I have a lot of freedom. So I have, basically someone comes to me with a problem, or here we did this assay, this is what we would like to see. And then I just, do it however, for the most part, ever I think that it needs to be done. I do have people who guide me, like a PI would, but for the most part, in this kind of environment, nonprofit research environment, it's very similar, and we have a lot of freedom for the most part. That being said, we're still like an LLC, we're still a company, so we, there's still a lot of like, you don't have the unending freedom of academia. You still have, you have to kind of follow certain, laws, policies, you have those things. But for the most part, as far as like research questions, we have a good amount of freedom. People want their questions answered, but how you go about answering those questions is generally up to us.
So I think there's actually a lot of similarities there to what I find in my job, where we do have stakeholders. They're like client success or product, but we're trusted as the experts to use data science in the best way possible to answer those questions. And so I can actually, like the project that I'm currently working on is pretty short. One of our clients came to us and said, hey, we think these numbers look wrong. What's going on? And now I get to do the investigative work of, are the numbers actually wrong? If they are, like what's going on? What do we need to change about our model or our system in order to rectify the situation? And what's the underlying reason why this happened? And I get to address that in any way that I see fit. And so as long as I can come back to our client success team and say, okay, here's an explanation that you can give to our client, and here is what we're doing, and this is our solution, and those are in understandable terms, the actual like data science or kind of scientific approach that I take is up to me. And I think that that's pretty classic across all of the projects that I work on, where it's like I do not get to say, this is out of all of the possible questions that I could ask with this data, this is the question that I'm going to ask and answer, like you might in academia, but I do, within the realm of a question that has been posed, have pretty much complete freedom, as long as it's justifiable to other data scientists on the team and my manager.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly chime in, since I think a lot of the great points are already shared already. But for, I guess, the data science centric projects that I'm involved in, I'm usually, well, so far, that's where I bring in the rest of the directors in terms of gearing what they want and basically using what they want as a guide to develop the software pipeline that I'm planning for the project. But in terms of the questions are really limited unless they're based upon another question. Usually, like the most freedom I get is the type of software that I might get to use in terms of getting to the right solution and getting the most robust data set, or getting the most robust results. But beyond that, yeah, I don't get to like ask whatever question I want with whatever metagenomic data I get.
Cool. So Ben asked a question that is a little bit too similar to the first question you already answered. So I might just ask Ben to check out the beginning of the YouTube video for that one. But like a sort of similarly related question could be kind of like, let's say you have a lot of time left in your PhD. How do you kind of acquire the skills that would be good for the future of data science, like in the next couple of years?
I find this a really hard question, because for the future of data science, I see it as, so data science has matured a ton over the past 10 years, from when it was first kind of thought of as a concept for businesses. And so what we're seeing right now in the industry is this specialization. And so it really depends on what skills you should acquire. If it's a specific skill set, probably depends on what company you want to work at or what problems you want to tackle. So I think like some easy ones to answer is like, oh, you want to do computer vision, then computer vision is a very well-developed area of research and work. You really need to be familiar with all of those tools. But if you are more undecided or want to focus on decision data science, which is what I do, where it's like using a prediction in order to give a recommendation or help a human make a better decision, then in many cases, the tools are varied, and in a lot of cases, it's undecided even what the best tool is at the company. We have talks about what type of model we should be using all the time. So I think the thing that I would emphasize is getting as much varied experience as possible. So if you have extra years in your PhD and you have the opportunity to do an internship. So I did one with, oh my gosh, what is it called? I'm sorry, I've forgotten the academic term for this, but not where you're a professor teaching students, but you're a researcher who does research for the community. There's a specific term for this, an extension. So I got to do an extension internship where I was doing kind of social science stuff for an educational farm that the UC system has. And that brought me in contact with a ton of different methods that I hadn't used before, and was my first entry into doing natural language processing as part of a statistical model, because I had never needed to work with language data before. But that was really helpful, because even though it wasn't a huge deep dive into this, I got to kind of explore more of the options out there in data science. And so then I could bring that experience, and I was actually able to do my insight project on natural language stuff because I had had a little bit of experience with it before. So I'd say just like try and get as much varied experience as possible in the real world.
Anything to add?
So I think for someone who I guess doesn't have a whole lot of modeling or data science heavy, you have data, you have data, and I think at least for me, kind of what the field or the niche that I'm in, analyzing that data, that if you want to get into something more, you don't have a lot of coding, I guess, experience, you doing the data analysis that you normally do, but do it in Python, do it in R, so it's reproducible. Start learning, and like learn GitHub, start trying to kind of assimilate those tools but already use in your day-to-day research that you do. I think even though you're not doing something super model heavy, a lot of the work is, I would say, you can do a lot of the work is communicating. A lot of the work is understanding that domain knowledge. A lot of the work is doing a lot of the kind of cleaning data, showing that you can do start with a messy data set and get information out of it. I think that's a big part of it. Get useful information out of it, right? And so I think, and there are lots of resources, like we had said before, about like data carpentry or any of these data camp classes or other grad quant, I think at UC Riverside, if that's still there. I think that there are those resources, but using them in a relevant context to you, or in an outside project, like Emily was saying, I think is a good first step. Because not everyone is going to be doing super complicated, modeling, or but it's showing that you have those at least basic skills and then can communicate them, I think is a good solid foundation. And for like the future of data science, that's a hard question. Definitely, I think definitely seeing from my perspective,
it's not zero.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think I'm seeing a lot of public data, a lot of data going public, a lot of a lot of these government initiatives, a lot of public data, and there's as well as like real world evidence, and I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for data scientists in the medical and biology field. And I think we need to collaborate, communicate. I think, that people are starting, especially in research and academia, are starting to appreciate computational biologists, and I think, and data scientists, and I think that's only going to grow. And I think the field is starting to change in a way that's going to kind of accommodate computational biologists, or, and I think, so hopefully, that there will be more of a place in academia and in research for this kind of field.
To pile on there a little bit, I also think that public data is going to become much larger in use. One of the problems that we see with it, and one of the problems that ARENA is facing right now, is we're trying to include at least, I think, 5 more data sets in our model this year, and we have to match all of that data. And so thinking about how are you going to go about taking this data that's at a hospital level and match it with economic unemployment data that is at a zip code level, let's say, and then also think about maybe, I don't know why, but maybe you're interested in weather systems and that's a different like level. how are you going to put that together into a data set that is actually usable to ask the questions that you want to ask with a model. And so that like data processing, data cleaning part of it, and the idea of like how do these data sets relate to each other is pretty large in my current work.
Yeah, that's super interesting to think about. I didn't mean to exclude startup swaying. If you have anything to say on the future of startups.
I'd say just think about what type of data or what type of, think about the questions you'd be interested in asking. This is super directed if you know like what types of companies you want to work in, which for me, like I didn't know, like I didn't know at the start of my job search, like, okay, I'll be working on something with like metagenomic data. But for if you're really interested in working with certain types of data, think about like what types of metadata come with that data too, because if you're merging different data sets and from different databases, you'll have to find a way for them to mesh perfectly, as mentioned with like different publicly available databases. But for me, I was looking toward, in terms of like, if you want to do more DNA-based analyses, then there's plenty of literature on like the available molecular data sets and how people have mined that data from metabolomic inferences just from DNA to building whole building whole genomes from metagenomes, like what I'm working on. So it comes down to what you're interested in, and even though, granted, I think in a job search you want to have also an open mind too, in terms of like the types of data you would be interested in working with too.
So can I actually take some more time on that question, because I just thought of an actual answer. So I think that the future of data science is going to actually be more reflective and understand that all of the data that we have is biased, and we haven't been doing anything to address the bias in that data. And so Arena debiases our data, but we can only debias as much as we have like the EEOC, like gender, race, ethnicity data from our clients. And so what we're seeing in policy is definitely a push towards making models more interpretable and understanding the negative consequences of models when they go wrong, when they're made with biased data. But I hope that we will see a huge increase in the number of ways that you can address bias in data, as well as a huge increase in the data sets that we have so that they are less biased. So one of the projects that I thought was really interesting that an Insight fellow did was seeing if they could machine learn diagnoses for skin like skin rashes, right? Is this eczema? Is this ringworm? Is this something else? And one of the biases that they found was that there is only white skin in the data sets. There is no black or brown skin. And so hopefully we will see a push towards actually collecting that data so that we can all be better in the future, and so that our data science can actually work for everyone and take everyone into account, which it doesn't right now.
That is a super good point that I had never thought about. So thank you for this discussion. I guess I will end. We're coming close to 4:30. So I'll end with just if everybody could give their least favorite part of their job and their favorite part of their job, and kind of with a pitch for why you should do data science or startup.
I guess I can go with that. Hi, I know. All right, maybe he'll be distracted if he gets to look at everyone. I think, so for me, my favorite part is just being, I think it's that aha moment, right? I think with data science, it's what really got me addicted to it in the first place, was working on a problem, not having to wait a week for the results, you know, like you do at the bench, and it's just really fast. And you know, you have chaos, you have data, dirty data, it's chaos. And then all of a sudden, hey, they don't want to read stories. And then all of a sudden, you do a certain model, you look at your data a certain way, you reduce the dimensions, and all of a sudden, hi, and all of a sudden, you know, you see the answer, or you see, you know, a conclusion. And that, I think, is so addicting and so awesome when you have that in your, it's almost like that, like a mystical breakthrough moment in science, right? It's like a mini version of that. I love that part. I also love talking to other scientists about their science. I love that part. People are so passionate, and really getting to know other scientists, I think that's a really great part that I like. My least, you know, and I think, yeah, so my least favorite part is my favorite part is interacting with scientists. My least favorite part is interacting with scientists. So I think that and what I mean by that, I think, is there's just some like with any job, you know, there are personalities that you have to navigate. And I think being able to, because I do talk to a lot of people, I am kind of high touch with a lot of people. I collaborate a lot. And so being able to navigate and adapt to personalities and adapt to how people work, because it's not necessarily the way I work. I think that has taken me, you know, has taken some time for me to learn how to do that. And I think sometimes, yeah, you know, that part is a bit challenging. But as far as like the data science part, I think that's just such a nice part. If I don't get to, you know, code and work through everything all the time, if I could do more of that, I think I would be, you know, happier. I think, but I think, you know, that it's such a great, for me, it's such a great job and field, because I can use kind of both sides of that, you know, the biology and the data science, and I feel really lucky to have found, you know, something like that, because I get to kind of have the best of both worlds in a way. So that's my pitch, and you can contact me if you would like to reach out for that stuff. And yeah, thanks. I'm gonna go check.
So I also have someone in the background trying to get my attention. So I actually have a really hard time identifying my least favorite thing about my job. There just aren't any pieces really that I don't like. I think that I could go on and on about how much I love it. I think the thing that is the most like different and also like the most positive from my academic experience to switching is the fact that I can see the collective impact of my team and feel like I had a small part in orchestrating that impact. It feels very much like a team sport rather than an individual endeavor. And even when someone is kind of quarterbacking a project, to continue with the sports metaphors, when they ask for help, like you then get recognized for that within the team of like, oh, you were a collaborator, and the time that you spent on that was incredibly valuable. And so I think just having that be a basis of like value assessment in my job has been so wonderful for my well-being, because I really like collaborating with other people. And so the fact that it is explicitly appreciated is great. I don't know, just like best thing, worst thing. Was there another part to your question, Jessica?
Oh, just the pitch for like why someone should get into data.
So we've all mentioned work-life balance, and the other thing that I will pitch is the financial security and the flexibility. So especially if you're going into the private sector, like the tech sector, I guess, most of the jobs are remote right now, or like right now, but also like open to being remote later on. And basically all of the salaries are 6 figures or above. And so it's one of those things where like the financial security and the flexibility that you get with that, as well as like I have unlimited vacation, unlimited PTO, and a lot of perks on the end of like health and other benefits. So just like that's also important for your well-being as a human, and data science can provide for that side as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking like I was just like, oh, that's kind of hard to figure out like what I don't like the most right now. But then I was just like, there's I guess what part of what I really like and what it can come around and be what I don't like sometimes. It's just the fast pace. Like it's never boring in terms of like the changing priorities, but at the same time, we're just like sometimes I have like this awesome timeline to like get this like wet lab project done, and then we're like, oh, we're shutting down our lab work right now to focus on this data science project. So there's a lot of that where you have to like really stay on your toes and be open to like flexibility, especially in a startup. But in terms of like the data science side, like the ability to like take um, very like unrelated pieces of information, or at least very unrefined pieces of information like sequence data. Like you have these 150 fragment letter strings of letters, and then you're synthesizing it to create information that is more accessible to your colleagues to that can build on and create new hypotheses. And that's really exciting, and that's especially with the data set that we're working on. I don't want to like go too far into the bounds of like our NDA in terms of our data set, but yeah, I think with data science, you'd be working with data that a lot of people might be really excited and envious to work with. Yeah, I think I was just trying to like run through everything in my head, but I think those are like the main highlights.
Awesome. Thank you so much from all the panelists and from the audience for really good questions.